right, Pence, breaking news right now. Donald Trump's running mate Mike Pence, his airplane just skidded off the runway at New York's LaGuardia Airport just moments ago. A lot of rain today in the area. Our producer, Elizabeth Landers, was on that plane. She joins me on the phone now. Elizabeth, what happened?
Hey, Erin, that's right. We had a ground hold earlier today, actually, in Iowa before we flew here. So we knew that there was going to be some bad weather here when we landed. The Pence plane was approaching probably 10 minutes ago on the runway here in LaGuardia, and we had a pretty hard landing. And then the press in the back of the plane could feel the plane fishtailing back and forth. We're actually still on the plane right now. The plane slid off the runway. We could feel the plane sliding off the runway, and then the plane came to a very sharp halt on the runway at LaGuardia. And we're sitting on the tarmac right now. The governor and everyone on board is okay. There are no reported injuries, and the plane is intact, no structural damage, according to the press secretary who came back to speak with the press. The governor himself actually came back and made sure that everybody on the plane was okay. He said that he saw mud on the windows up at the front. So we did clearly come totally off the runway here at LaGuardia.
Wow. And Elizabeth, I'm just letting everyone know what we're looking at is a what we call a pool feed. So all of the networks are getting the same feed from on board the plane where you are. You can see the emergency lights and vehicles off the back.
Yes.
And just so everyone understands what we're looking at on our screen. But I mean, it must have been pretty terrifying when it actually happened. You're describing it as fishtailing?
Yes. I mean, we could feel the plane moving, and it was, it was just not a natural landing that you experience. I'm coming off the plane right now, so excuse me. We have rescue crews here. It looks like we have some firefighters and fire here, and you can probably hear the police right there asking if there are any injuries. It's a pretty big scene here right now. Hopefully you can see the shot up that, oh my God, wow. Looks like there's actual damage to the runway here, which I'm looking at. I'll take some photographs as well. But yeah, it's bad rain here, and clearly.
And what do you see on the runway when you say damage, Elizabeth? Sorry.
I'm sorry. Repeat that one more time.
What do you see on the runway? You said damage.
Yeah, I'm seeing. It looks like huge gashes in the runway here. Big divots where the plane wheels appear to have taken part of the runway off.
Wow. I mean, that is a pretty incredible thing. Obviously, she's driving it, everyone. You could hear fishtailing when that plane landed, gashes in the runway. Pretty terrifying. All those emergency vehicles now around Mike Pence's plane, but the governor unhurt, the press pool unhurt. AC 360 continues right now.
Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news. The plane carrying vice presidential nominee Mike Pence has skidded off the runway at New York's LaGuardia Airport. This is video of the evacuation itself. It happened on landing on a very rainy night here. CNN aviation analyst and airline captain Les ABEND is on the phone with us to explain what we are seeing. Let's explain, how this happens and what you think happened.
Yeah, hi, Anderson. I'm just looking at the weather report here, and we had a pretty unusual event, as most of us know, in the Northeast with regard to the snow and the temperatures being pretty low, and the runway appears to be wet. It appears to be a hydroplaning event on landing. More than likely, they were landing on runway 4. LaGuardia is not a very long runway. So you've got to be really precise and right on things. It looks to me like there was a major attempt to obviously stop the airplane, and the anti-skid system on board that aircraft would have kicked in and kept the wheels from locking up. The important thing is that it appears that nobody was hurt at this point, but
Les, just hold on one second. I want to go to our Liz Landers, who was on the plane. She's joining us now on the phone. Liz, explain what you felt. What do you know?
Sure. Hey, Anderson. So we had a ground hold earlier today when we were in Iowa. We knew that there was going to be bad weather coming into LaGuardia today. We experienced some turbulence when we were flying in, and when we landed here, we had pretty hard landing, and then felt the back of the plane start to fishtail, and you could just feel the plane moving in a way that wasn't straight on the runway like a normal landing would go. The plane continued to proceed down the runway in that way. Sorry, I'm being moved on the tarmac right now. And then we came to a very sort of quick and harsh halt there on the runway. And we just deplaned. Everyone is fine on the airplane. There are no injuries. Governor Pence and his staff are fine. And there are a lot of rescue crews here. I'm not sure if you're seeing the pool shot, but
Yeah, we are.
there appears to be police and fire rescue here. And there's significant damage to the runway here as well. It looks like you can see divots where the wheels of the plane dug into the runway and damaged the runway. They're going to have to do reconstruction to this part of the runway. So we just deplaned off the back of the airplane, and everyone is fine, but definitely a little rattled.
Liz, about how long, from the moment you actually touched down and started to feel the tail of the aircraft kind of moving oddly, I mean, how long did it last for until you came to a complete stop?
It was probably 20 or 30 seconds. It wasn't that long, but it was long enough to feel that this was not a straight, smooth landing on the runway. And judging by what I'm seeing here on the runway, which is, it looks like cement that has been torn up by the wheels of the plane, you can see that the wheels and the plane moved off the runway before we slammed to a halt.
And just to be clear, no injuries from anyone that you know of
Correct.
on that plane?
Yes, absolutely no injuries. And in fact, Governor Pence immediately came back to the plane once it was fully stopped and made sure that everybody, including the press, was okay. And he said that he saw mud on his window up at the front of the airplane. So at that point, we could definitely tell that we were off the runway because we weren't exactly sure in the back what we were seeing out the windows. And so he came back and said that he saw that we were off the runway.
So the plane itself, to your understanding, stopped off the side of a runway in grass or in mud?
Yes, exactly. The plane is off the runway, yes.
Do you know how far off the runway it is?
Let me look. We're still here. We're getting sort of moved out of the area.
If you got to leave, you got to leave. Don't worry about it.
The plane is in the grass, actually. So one of the wheels is fully in the grass. Let me see if I can go get some photos. But, yeah, one of the wheels is completely in. Actually, the entire plane is on the grass at the tarmac here in LaGuardia.
I want to bring in Les ABEND. Liz, I think you got to be moved, so I totally understand that. Stay on the phone if you can, but if you can't, you got to go. Les, I mean, from everything Liz is telling you, how unusual is this? I mean, I can't remember the last time I saw a plane do this at LaGuardia.
No, this is, I mean, it's an unusual situation, but we did have an unusual weather event today, Anderson, with reference to what the runway surface would be like. It's a very slippery surface because the temperature is so close to freezing, and it looks to me I'm getting the information as quickly as you are, and I'm trying to determine which runway I'm just trying to get myself oriented just by looking at the pictures, but it's possible that in addition to the slippery runway that there was a tailwind situation, which makes the airplane very difficult to stop. So. They do have reverse thrust. The reverse thrust was probably used in excess as reverse thrust is used on most landings, but it appears that they went into a skid situation that took them off the runway. Hey, just looking at the pictures.
Les, I mean, this may be a dumb question, but I mean, having flown into LaGuardia, throughout my life, there's water all around, and in some of it seems like, at least in my memory, in some of the landings, you're flying over water until the last minute when the runway is right there, right?
Yeah, you're referring to landing on runway 22, which is to the southwest. So you land on part of the bay. Matter of fact, as you land, Rikers Island is on the right-hand side. Yeah. But it's hard for me to tell if that was the runway they were landing on. But I mean, that's not really a factor. The surface, beneath the wings makes no real difference. It's the surface beneath the wheels that makes the difference. In the cockpit, we would be judging what type of situation that we have. We might have got braking action reports. They were probably good braking action reports. So why this happened, it's at this point it's hard to say. It's possible it could have been a mechanical failure, Anderson, with a reverse thrust not being deployed appropriately and giving it asymmetrical thrust, which would have forced it off of the runway possibly. It's hard to say.
Yeah, we don't need to speculate in that regard. We're certainly just glad everyone's okay. Let's just hold on one second. We're getting word Donald Trump has called Governor Pence and has expressed relief that everybody is doing okay. Les, in a situation like this, our producer was saying that it looks like some of the runway is torn up. This, again, may be a dumb question, but is that something wheels of an aircraft would actually do to a runway?
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like they might have blown some tires, which could have been a failure of the anti-skid system, which is supposed to prevent that. So, but an airplane that
and we're seeing,
going
I think
on,
we're seeing Governor Pence there right now. Yeah. Continue.
Yeah,
sorry. Continue, Les.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible if you blew out some tires, Anderson, you're basically on the wheel hubs that could tear up the concrete like that. But once the airplane goes into the grass. It's a tough situation, and it really could tear up, and definitely.
And there's Governor Pence thanking some of the firefighters, posing for pictures with some of the firefighters. A scene right outside the aircraft that our producer was saying seems to be fully on the grass off the runway at this point. We're also joined by CNN aviation correspondent Miles O'Brien, who joins us also on the phone. Miles, I mean, you know this airport well. How surprising is this to you?
Well, Anderson, this is varsity flying. You don't go into LaGuardia in a 737 without being on your toes, and in a driving rain, you really want to make sure you get everything just right.
And by the way, Miles, I'm sorry, I'm being told there's a ground stop now at LaGuardia for flights. So again, sorry, continue, Miles.
As would be expected in this case. That broken concrete that you've been talking about, Anderson, is Engineered Materials Arrestor System, which was installed at LaGuardia and a few other airports that I would put in that same varsity category, Midway being one of them, short runways with fast aircraft coming in. And it is designed to break apart on the weight of the landing gear and stop the aircraft from going any further. If it were not there in this case, it's very likely this aircraft would be in the East River, and that would be an entirely different situation. So it worked, and that's a good thing, and that's a good thing for everybody on board.
How does that actually work?
There.
How does that kind of a runway work?
Basically, it's a thin veneer of concrete. It's just like going into a quicksand, if you will, or it's a breakaway concrete that collapses under the weight of the aircraft and stops it. It's an arrestor system, and it's a very useful thing that, in this case, certainly prevented injuries and maybe saved some lives. Who knows?
Hey, Miles, I want to bring in our safety analyst, David SOUCIE, who's joining us on the phone as well. And I think in some of those shots, you can actually, in the background, see some of that broken up runway, that broken up concrete. David, again, I guess the obvious question is, what do you make of this? How surprised are you?
Well, it's very surprising, as Miles said. This is a varsity runway. This is something you just don't fly into if you don't know what you're doing. So obviously something went wrong to make him go through that. One of the two things that, as Miles said, there's also a breakaway. What happens there is that it's designed it's kind of like foaming the runway. It's a way to slow down the aircraft. It's something they could have used in train accidents of late as well to slow it down as it goes forward. So it's a safety mechanism to say if the airplane loses control in any way, it stops that aircraft before it goes off into the runway, turns off the runway, turns over, rolls over, anything along that nature. And those were put in designs in airports about 20 years ago after, in Denver, actually, an aircraft had come off the runway and slid off and didn't stop and continued and rolled over and got into some houses alongside the runway. So some of that safety improvement, as we see now, actually is very effective, and we have people walking away without losing lives.
You know, our producer Liz Landers is still with us as well. She's actually been on, she was on the flight. She is on the runway. I believe she's still on the runway. Liz, do you know which runway you were flying into?
The police.
Sorry, Liz, do you know what runway you were flying into?
I do not know that right now.
Okay.
I can try to figure that out for you guys. But just to give you an update, Governor Pence is now off the airplane, and I can see him on the tarmac speaking with law enforcement officers. There is a lot of both police and fire department presence here. I would say I see probably 1, 2, 3, 4. I see 4 fire department trucks and lots of other police vehicles here right now. I mean, this is a full-on fire and rescue.
And
operation right
Liz,
here
we're also, I know you can't tell what the camera's on. We are also looking now at Governor Pence shaking hands. That's actually recorded just some minutes ago, him shaking hands with firefighters after he got off the aircraft. So Liz, for those viewers who are just joining us, if you could just describe again what you felt first of all, there had been a delay on this flight. So
right.
you knew it was bad weather coming into New York, but just explain what you felt when you realized something as you started to land.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, we knew it was going to be bad weather. We had been in Iowa earlier today. He had done a campaigning event here, and so we came into LaGuardia, and you could feel the turbulence. I mean, low clouds, couldn't see much out the windows. And as soon as we landed on the runway here, it was a pretty hard landing. And then you could feel the plane fishtailing towards the back, which is where the press is, and the governor and his staff sits in the front of the aircraft. You could feel the plane fishtailing in the back. And then probably after 20 or 30 seconds, they slammed on the brakes of the airplane, and we all sort of sat there in silence and were wondering what was going on. A member of the Secret Service came back and said that there was no structural damage to the airplane, but that we were off the runway. And at that point, Governor Pence came back to make sure that everybody was okay. He just checked in with the press and said, "Are you guys doing okay?" He said that there was mud on his window at the front that indicated to us that we had run off the runway. And as I sort of told you a minute ago, the plane is fully off the tarmac, and it is in the grass here, and it looks like the tarmac and the concrete was pretty dug up and pretty badly damaged upon landing.
And you said it felt like it was skidding from the rear of the aircraft, like the rear of the aircraft was kind of moving toward the front.
Right. It felt like the back of the airplane was fishtailing and didn't have as much control, I guess, as the front of the airplane did. And you could tell it just was not a straight landing on a straight runway.
We're also joined by our safety analyst, David SOUCIE. David, why would the rear of the aircraft move like that and not the front?
Well, because of the mass and what's happening, and as far as the slowing, if you had a flat tire or something going on in the front, then those aircraft in the back is going to try to accelerate past it. It's much like a jackknifing of a truck. And so you feel the back of it, you feel the aircraft trying to move itself forward, the inertia in the back of the plane trying to overcome the inertia in the front of the plane. Also, the front landing gear could have collapsed, driving it downward and giving you the feeling of the fact that the back is trying to outrun the front.
And we're also joined by Mary SCHIAVO, who's the former Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Transportation. She's currently an attorney for victims and families of transportation accidents. Mary, what happens now in a case like this?
Well, it falls under the purview of the National Transportation Safety Board, and they have a lot of experience with accidents like this. Everything from, there was one in Little Rock with American Airlines, and what happens is the wheels, when they do not get good traction with the runway, when there's a layer of water on it, it is very much like hydroplaning with your car. There's a scrubbing action between the wheels and the runway, and sometimes it leaves characteristic marks, so the NTSB will investigate. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but they will have to come to the airport and look at it before they move the plane. So we'll slow everything down in New York. And LaGuardia has had this very thing happen before with, I think it was Southwest not long ago, and other aircraft. So they're accustomed to doing these investigations at LaGuardia. So it will be an NTSB investigation.
And we're getting a good look now at the aircraft. Miles, I mean, and again, we've seen some of that runway. It really does look like it's been torn up.
Yes, it does, Anderson. It's most likely runway 13. That signifies its compass heading, meaning they were headed off to the southeast. The wind was coming out of that direction, pretty gusty. And what you're looking at is the aircraft on the cusp of Flushing Bay. And if it weren't for those arresters, that breakaway material, there's a good chance that aircraft would be there. One of the things that would be interesting to understand here is if the thrust reversers were working in this case. That is, anybody who's flown on an airplane understands what that's like when you land and you get that sense of the engine sort of operating in reverse. And that's essentially a mechanical device that turns the thrust in the opposite direction to slow the aircraft down. Were they trying to brake entirely just using traditional brakes? Were they using the thrust reversers? And if the thrust reversers were deployed, did they work completely symmetrically, which is an important point in all of this.
You know, David SOUCIE, our safety analyst, I mean, planes, and again, pardon my ignorance, but planes take off and land in rain, seems like all the time. Why would tonight be different? Is it because the temperature was low?
Well, it can. It can actually get into a situation where it creates this ice barrier, but it's just more about hydroplaning than it is ice, Anderson. But as Miles had said, I was looking at the photographs here about the thrust reverser deployment, and it appears as though the right thrust reverser is still deployed, which is uncharacteristic. So it could possibly be that there was a unparalleled thrust reverse, which can put airplanes off. In Chicago, I experienced that once before in an accident I did where one of the thrust reversers came off, and then it burns out one of the brakes because they're trying to keep the aircraft straight with the brakes. That's all the option you have. And then it starts to pull off to one side and then pulls off to the side and tries to get off the airport. So that can be complicated when you have water on the runway because it becomes a hydroplane, and your brakes aren't nearly as effective if that water's lifting your tires up off of the runway.
And Liz Landers, our producer who was on board the aircraft, is Governor Pence still there? It looked like we had a camera in a car, and I wondered if that was him leaving.
Yeah, that's right, Anderson. So we are now leaving the airport right now. The governor is going to his hotel. I just spoke with his press secretary who said that the fundraiser that he was supposed to have tonight in New York has been called off, understandably so, and he will be going to his hotel probably to relax and sort of unwind with his family there tonight. They do say, though, tomorrow everything else is on schedule. The governor will be going to events in Pennsylvania and then later in the afternoon and in the evening in North Carolina.
Liz, this has got to be a really kind of tricky situation for the Secret Service. I mean, if they're on the aircraft realizing something's going wrong with the aircraft, obviously their job is to protect the vice president, to protect his family, to protect the nominee.
Right.
But I assume they're strapped in as well. They can't get up either.
Right, absolutely. I mean, as soon as we landed, like I said, the plane came to a really kind of immediate and short halt there, and the Secret Service immediately popped out of their seats once the airplane had come to a complete stop. I'm sure they could tell that something had gone wrong with the landing, so they popped up and were checking on the governor, and then they came back. It looks like one of the Secret Service agents spoke with the pilot because one of the agents came back and said there's no structural damage and there is a rescue team on the way. So at that point we knew that we had, come off the runway and that this would not be your regular deplaning that we do when we travel with the governor.
Liz, just in terms of getting off the aircraft, I mean, was a chute deployed or did they bring stairs?
They brought stairs, so they were able to bring stairs to the back of the airplane, which is where the press and the media sits. So we deplaned after the Secret Service. The Secret Service got off the plane first in the back. Then the press gathered all of our gear and our belongings and sort of scrambled off the back of the plane. And then the governor and his staff came off after that.
Liz, it's a little hard to tell from the picture. Is the bay in front of the plane or is it the highway? I mean, we see lights, but I can't tell if there's a body of water in front of those lights.
I was not able to see whether we were in front of water there or not. I'm sorry.
Miles, based on where you think this was, can you tell?
Well, it's hard to see. I see what you're saying, Anderson, about the traffic, but I think there might be a body of water in between. As you well know, with LaGuardia, it's kind of there's water kind of all around it, and most likely that's the end of runway 13, which would put it toward Flushing Bay, sort of at the southeast corner of the airport. And pretty much any runway you go into there, you're facing water at the end, and that's why that material is installed there. There's not a lot of what we call overrun space there. You know, you go to a place like Dallas or Atlanta, there's a lot of buffer zone between the runway and traffic or whatever. In this case, you know, LaGuardia is, you know, it's basically a stationary aircraft carrier. It's just sitting there on the water, and there's not a lot of overrun space, and that's why this material, this engineered material, is so crucial in this case for keeping the aircraft from getting in the water and causing a much more catastrophic situation.
And David Soucie, how long would they keep the airport, would they keep a ground stop going for? And is the ground stop because of specifically what happened to this aircraft, or I mean, there are other runways, do they just need to check all the runways, check all the conditions?
I'm sorry, Anderson, I didn't hear you in the very first part of that question.
The question is how long would the airport have a ground stop, and is the reason for the ground stop simply to investigate what happened to this aircraft, or is it to check all runways and the conditions?
Well, there's twofold. That's a very good question. The first part is there anything going on that runway? So they shut down that runway. The ground stop has to do with the fact that the FAA has 9 responsibilities, and one of those responsibilities during an accident is to assure that there's not something wrong with the facilities themselves. So that is the first thing that they're going to check and make sure that everything's going on, make sure there's nothing that was on the runway or some kind of damage to the runway, or maybe there was someone who intentionally damaged the runway. That needs to all be determined, and then inspect the rest of the airport, all the other runways, all the other taxiways, to make sure that there's nothing else going on that's something more to do with this than just this one particular accident.
And David, obviously when it snows out, you know, they clear the runway of snow. When it's raining, do they go around the airport clearing the any water that's built up, or does that sort of naturally drain off a runway?
Well, it's not natural, but they do design it specifically for that, and they design it for very, very high rainfall to be able to get the rain off of the airport immediately. But there's also tests that are done to make sure that the runways are prepared, and they have a truck that they can drive out there and check whether the ice, for example, is causing the runway to be non-responsive as far as braking goes. So you have a braking reading that can tell you what the braking effectivity of the aircraft is in the wintertime, and they'll do that occasionally in super heavy rainfall, but this I don't think would have qualified for that.
And Miles O'Brien, they would, reroute planes to Newark, to JFK?
Yeah, if the runway braking action were not satisfactory, no sane pilot would come in that situation with a 737. But it's a dynamic situation, and you can make a call on a few minutes on final to go, and things can change. And these runways are in fact engineered to shed water. They've got kind of a turtle back to them, and they have grooves in them. All of it is designed to channel water off the runway to the edge. But anybody who's driven a car has occasionally gone through a puddle, hydroplaned, and know what this is all about. You can imagine aircraft coming in at 150 miles an hour, give or take, and the wheels hitting and getting no traction whatsoever. The thrust reversers can help in that situation, but did they do their job exactly right? Everything has to work just perfectly at LaGuardia on a good day. On a bad day, you really can't. There's just no margin for error.
And David Soucie, how long would they keep the aircraft in the position that it's in as part of the investigation, or is there a premium put on, getting that aircraft, moving it off so that they can get that runway working again?
Well, first of all, it's a matter of getting the people off and away from the aircraft, which they've already done, it appears.
Right, because it looks like they just turned off the lights on the aircraft inside.
Right. So the second is then securing the aircraft area, and then they have to do the investigation. So they have to figure out what happened as much as they can on site. They don't want to disturb any kind of evidence, anything that would lead them to the conclusion of what happened there. So that is first priority, leaving the airport down, I kept an airport down in Hawaii when a Japan Airlines had a very similar accident. The brakes were locked up and they didn't release, and so the aircraft pulled off to the left side. It was a 747. We had that airport closed for more than 2 days, although we could have moved it. We kept it down for 2 days in Hawaii, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
You can imagine how many people were upset about that in Oahu.
You must have been very popular then.
No, I was not a popular person for sure. And so you do what you have to do to make sure you're not destroying evidence about trying to figure out what happened, because the utmost important thing is to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So if there's something you can learn from it, that's the first priority at that point, as long as everybody else is off the aircraft and safe. The second priority then is clearing the airport.
Yeah, and the most important headline for anybody who's just joining us is that there are no reports of any injuries of anybody who was on board the vice president nominee plane. The vice presidential nominee for the Republican Party has left the airport with the press corps, who was also on the plane. The governor is heading to his hotel. There was a fundraising event tonight in New York. That has been canceled, but apparently his schedule will resume tomorrow. I want to bring in our CNN political director as we continue to monitor the situation at LaGuardia. Just from a political standpoint, how disruptive is something like this, David?
Well, listen, what you just said is the most disruptive part, which is the fundraiser got canceled, which is part of Mike Pence's core mission right now, because Donald Trump is no longer doing fundraisers personally. Neither is Hillary Clinton. But, Anderson, you got to remember what Liz Landers and her colleagues and the Pence staff's life has been like for the last couple months. They move in this bubble, motorcade to plane, up, down, next city, next rally, motorcade to plane, back. So this is a jolt, obviously, because it's so unusual for something like this to happen. You saw that Donald Trump and Kellyanne Conway, the campaign manager, immediately called Mike Pence to check in and make sure everything is okay. And as you said, the best news is that there were no injuries. So upending a vice presidential nominee's schedule is no easy thing. And so whether or not that fundraiser gets rescheduled or not, and we know that he's headed to Pennsylvania next. So depending how long this investigation is with the plane, will this plane be able to move Mike Pence, his Secret Service, and the press corps tomorrow first thing to Pennsylvania? If not, they need to deal with the logistics of that.
At this stage of the race, how important is one fundraiser on one night in New York? I mean, how much potentially are we talking, a couple $1 million?
I don't know what the total was scheduled for him, the haul that he was going to take in tonight. Obviously, the whole reason he was here tonight was primarily to attend that fundraiser.
But now his schedule, I mean, the schedule of everybody on Republican and Democrat is very now tightly orchestrated. I mean, they're looking, they're in a tough battle. They're critical battleground states that we're going to look at, later on. The map is changing for the electoral, the path to 270 electoral votes. So this thing is scheduled by the hour.
Yes, I would say by the quarter hour, it really is how their schedules are. And because Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have stood down on personally attending fundraisers from here on out, just focused on sort of the campaign travel, Tim Kaine and Mike Pence are still out there trying, because remember, they didn't take matching funds. They are raising money all the way through November 8th to try to spend, get on the air, make sure they have the ground game in place. They still need to bring that cash in.
Right. I want to, it's just about it's 8:30 here on the East Coast. I want to bring in our Liz Landers, if you're just joining us, to just bring you up to date on what has happened. The plane that Governor Pence was on, coming to a fundraiser in New York, skidded off the runway at LaGuardia Airport. There's been bad weather all day. It is, and you see the plane now in that video from moments ago. It's ended up in the grass off the runway. Our producer Liz Landers was on board the aircraft when it happened. Liz, for our viewers again at this half-hour mark who are just joining us, just explain. I mean, you knew coming into New York that there was bad weather. You knew there had been issues on the ground. It was delayed as it was. Where were you going tonight, and then what happened?
Yeah, so we were coming from Iowa earlier today. Governor Pence had a rally in Fort Dodge. We actually had about an hour-long delay sitting on the tarmac in Iowa, and he threw the football around because there was enough time that we could get off the plane there. And so then we reboarded and we flew here to New York City. We were flying into LaGuardia Airport, and the governor was supposed to have a fundraiser scheduled around 6:30, 7 p.m. tonight in downtown Manhattan. And when we came in, you could feel turbulence, and it was not a smooth descent into New York. And we came into LaGuardia and hit the runway pretty hard here. I think it jolted everybody on the plane, and then the plane proceeded down the runway for about 20 or 30 seconds, and the plane was not in control on the runway, and it felt like the back of the plane, which is where the press sits, was sort of fishtailing, like maybe the back wheels were not working. I'm not exactly sure, but it did not feel like it was a smooth, straight landing there on the runway. And then about after 20 or 30 seconds, the plane came to a very sudden halt there on the runway at LaGuardia. And Governor Pence came back after the plane was completely stopped and made sure that everybody was okay, checked in with the press, and he said that there was mud on his window. And upon deplaning, the press saw that the plane ran completely off of the runway there.
And Liz, what was the event tonight that the governor was going to? I know it was a fundraising event. Any idea of how much it was going to mean for the campaign? And do you know what his schedule is tomorrow?
I don't have too many details on the fundraiser for tonight, other than it was going to be another closed-door fundraiser, and he has been continuing to fundraise. He had a fundraiser yesterday in Utah, a small group of people, and I think that this is probably going to be another small event in Manhattan this evening. And tomorrow, his schedule, according to his advisors, who I spoke to on the tarmac there, remains the same. He is scheduled to go to the swing state of Pennsylvania, where he has a rally, and then later on to North Carolina for an evening event. And right now, his schedule remains the same, and the governor's fundraiser was called off tonight, and he's going back to the hotel with his family in New York.
We should point out, Donald Trump is in Ohio. The campaign, of course, obviously continues.